And move your right knee a little forwards and a little backwards. And what direction forwards are you moving it in? So what direction you move it in might be aimless. It might be the direction that you've decided is forward. Might be forward towards your right hand, but it could be forward towards your left hand. And can you still think that your knee would be moving forwards if it moved in the direction of between your left hand and your left knee? It's still forwards, because forwards is not a point. It's relative to yourself, and it has a breadth to it, a dimension to it. Okay. Now continue to take your right knee forwards and a little more to the left, and notice what happens in your pelvis. Does your pelvis start to turn a little bit? Does it tilt? Does it drop? So turn, does one side go down to the floor and the other side lift away from the floor? Or does it tilt so that one side goes in the direction of one shoulder or the other shoulder? And what are you doing with your head? Are you focusing so much on what you're doing that your head is fixed as if somebody had their hands on it? I saw a bit of that. Possibly. That's great. If you admit to possibly, you're starting to open. So what about now if I suggested to you, could you move your right knee in a way that it would allow you to sit, move your pelvis towards the floor, sorry, delete the word sit, move your pelvis towards the floor to the right. I said delete sit. You can't delete it once it's said, can you? So come back and do it slower so that as you grow the movement, as you do it bit by bit, you can notice where on the floor to the right are you aiming your pelvis, moving your pelvis towards, and can you come back without doing a heave, without pressing, that's interesting, pressing some part of you or pushing some part of you into the floor. So one of Moshe's descriptors of an intentional, efficient movement is that it has reversibility. So how reversible can you make this? Moving your knee forwards, taking your pelvis towards the floor on the right, in order to, when you get there, to sit and then come back up. Now notice, what sort of relationship do you have between your head and your pelvis? Are any of the movements that we were looking at before lunch, present in this action? Do you turn your head? Do you side bend your head? And what does your head know about what your pelvis is doing? Is your head cooperating with the direction that your pelvis and spine are moving in? Could you think that you're wanting to do this in a way that your pelvis kisses the floor? So you land so delicately that there is no bump, because there's a difference between sitting with a bump and sitting with a kiss. So you're on your hands and knees, sliding your right knee between your left knee and your left hand, and moving to sit on the floor with your pelvis to the right. and then come back. Which side of you tends to lengthen? Which, if you think of the distance between your right shoulder and your right hip, does that distance get smaller or larger as you move your pelvis to the right? Does the distance between your right shoulder, no, left. No, I said right, yes. Right shoulder and right side of your pelvis, hip joint, get longer or shorter as you sit your pelvis to the right? Okay, could you bend now your left elbow and put your left forearm on the floor? That's the only thing we're changing. So you're on your hands and knees and you put your left forearm on the floor, your palm of the hand on the floor, and now move your right knee between your left elbow and your left knee and see, is it possible? Does this make it easier or harder for you? Does it clarify? And still, when you come to your side, your head is as upright as it can comfortably be with the constraint of having your forearm on the floor. How much side bending do you do and how much turning? And do you have an idea where your pelvis should come to the floor? Or you're allowing yourself to find a pathway, feel a pathway that has a trajectory. So the pathway of your pelvis through space, you can think of it as having a trajectory. So it would trace a shape in space. If you put a little neon light that could leave a trail with a slow motion camera somewhere on the back of your pelvis, could be on your tailbone, could be on the lowest lumbar vertebra, then it may give you a sense of following the movement of your pelvis through space and feeling the connection between the movement of your pelvis and the turning and bending of your head. Okay, rest a moment. Lie down and rest a moment. So is it a little easier doing slightly bigger movements on your hands and knees? Raise something if it is. It can be an arm, it can be a leg. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe about 15. Raise something if it isn't any easier. Is it more comfortable for you to be moving on your hands and knees in a way where you're changing position, really? You're changing your relationship to the floor, as opposed to staying on your hands and knees and doing little circles or doing... So that's a yes. Yeah. How many no's? Okay, 1, 2. Okay. So 3. More often than not, so for quite a few people, it's changed something. And why would that be? If you think about it, is it easier for you to stand still for a long period of time or to walk? Yeah, moving. So I think you may have heard the talk, or you may have understood or read that we are basically unstable in our upright organization. And it takes work to maintain a stationary position. More work than it takes to keep moving. And when we move, we create a contraction and a lengthening and a shortening of our muscles and moving in different combinations. And the smaller the movement, the more complex is the organization to create smaller changes. So when we make bigger movements, we can move parts of ourselves through space. When we're on, say, our 2 feet or our hands and knees and we're maintaining that position, unless we have a very efficient organization, it's challenging the very habits that we have got accustomed to living with. Because now, to make this position comfortable, we would need to use those parts and relationships in ourselves differently. Could you come back up onto your hands and knees, please? And let's explore that to the left side. You can lean on palms of your hands, on your knuckles, or ape type hand stance, you know, which is thumb and fingers like that. So you're going to organize yourself slowly and progressively to sit to the left. But don't get there in one go. So now it's your left knee that will be moving forwards. So if your right knee moves forwards, it makes it very difficult to sit to the left in the same way. So keep your arms long for the moment and then come back. So feel the movement of your pelvis through space, what that evokes along the length of your spine to your head. And is your head listening and responding to the direction your pelvis is moving in? And vice versa? How much side bending and how much turning do you do through your spine? It's most likely that there's a little difference on this side. Do you keep your arms long but not stiff? Because stiff, if we don't need them to be stiff, is extra work. How are you breathing as you're doing this? As you move your left knee forwards and to the right, which side of you lengthens and which side of you shortens? So if you're not sure, try keeping your left ear towards your left shoulder as you sit your pelvis to the left. So as you move your left knee through to the right, keep your left ear, not turning, side bending. Just to make it more complicated. See what that's like. And then try the other way. Next time you come back, as you take your left knee through to the right, bend your right ear towards your right shoulder. And how do your ribs respond to that? Is that a confused smile, Gloria, or just a smile? If your hands get too close to your knees, you are going to make it a little more difficult for yourself. Is it easier to kiss the floor this side than the other side, or was the other side easier? So what are you doing with your head? Are you rotating more, side bending more, or a combination of both, which is most likely, but can you feel the timing when you're doing what? When is your head turning through space? When is it turning through the vertebra of your neck? And when does it start to side bend? Now, could you begin to move from one side to the other? It's slowly coming back, slowly going down to sit. So how do you do this, going from one side to the other? Do you move one knee forwards and then the other knee backwards? Do you stand on one knee, free the other, and then come back to standing on one knee when you go to the other side? Do you need to stand on your knees in the middle? And sense what your pelvis is doing. Can you sense what your pelvis is doing? How is it moving through space? What are you doing with your head? Does your head move right and left? So keep your hands on the floor, because having your hands on the floor is asking more of some part of your torso than if you take your hand off the floor. Once you know that, you can do it either way. So some people are pivoting on their knees. Knees are turning to one side. They're staying together. Knees are turning to one side. Then the pelvis lifts. The knees turn to the other side, and the feet turn in the opposite direction. Could you do it that way? So come up on your hands and knees. Put your legs together. And sit to one side, keeping your knees together, not letting one slide forwards or backwards. It might slide a little bit relative to one another, and then lift your pelvis, go to the other side. And if you don't need to pause in the middle, if you can go from one side to the other, do it. And what's the difference between your pelvis, the movement of your pelvis this way, and the movement of your pelvis when you move one knee forwards and one knee backwards? Just see, can you find out something about the movement of your pelvis in space? So slide one knee, and when you slide one knee, do it a little faster. Maybe that'll clarify it a little bit. Okay, so maybe you just come and have a look up here. Can we look at you and Chelsea? Yeah? Yeah? Thank you. So can you agree which is your preferred way? What's your preferred way? Do you know? Just those two. The one knee sliding forwards and back, or knees together? Knees together, great. Could you do your knees together way? please. So that's great. If you slow down and go in the same direction, it'll be even easier for people to to follow. Yeah, that's right. So she's, yeah, synchronized is actually easier to see what's different than if you're tracking a different timing of someone. That's it. Great. Okay. So look at the path, you keep going, of her pelvis, and that's the same. This is a, you know, very human movement. Okay, could you do the other one, please? So where you slide one knee forwards and one knee back. So now you see more turning and a more arc-like semicircle movement of the pelvis in space. It's not so clear on back. And there's more turning through the spine of the whole torso, so there's more turning of the head in space. Can you go back to the other one, please? Can you look forwards and do that? Yeah. Beg your pardon? Can you, Beck? And just keep your knees. Yeah. Keep your knees from. Can you show us what you mean? So it's something you did, Helen? So then your pelvis is sitting the same side as your feet are going, more or less, even though it's not going over. Oh, that's another way of doing it. Pivoting over the knees. Third way, inventive. And also, where is Anna? Anna had another way. Can we have a look at your way too, please? Hopefully you'll remember what it was now that you've seen those. Yeah. Share a mat. So do the sliding one, where you slid your knees, one forwards, one back. So you kept your pelvis lower. That's not the one I saw. So I was impressed because I hadn't seen Lockie's other way of doing it, which I hadn't thought of. But let's see if we can keep your pelvis really low. So keep your pelvis low, slide your right knee forwards and to the left. And this, open your knees a bit more. No. Open. No, not lengthen your leg. Not lengthen your leg. Yes. Okay. Now you came. I could probably mimic it. I'll try it. See if I can. So it was. There was the undulation of flexion extension. This is what you were doing. There was a little. No, she. I don't. There was a bit of bend in the elbows, but because she had the movement of flexion extension, you were able to move yourself in that way, organize yourself in that way. So let's go and try the other ways. No. And that's the interesting thing about words. Often we'll interpret them in a way that they make sense to us, usually because of our organization or some experience we have. And it can be quite liberating when you start to hear differently because you've freed your. Yeah. So go back to your places and try out the different ways, the 4 ways we saw. Thank you very much. And notice which one you prefer. We all have one that we prefer. It's easier. Bugs? So one way was with one knee sliding forwards, the other can slide a little backwards, so the legs are separating. The other was keeping the legs together and sweeping them. So there were 3 ways actually with keeping the knees together. That's what, oh no, 2 ways. One was keeping the knees fixed on the floor and moving the pelvis in a big arc right and left. And the other was keeping the pelvis low, taking it backwards and creating more folding through the spine and then extending again. Except that's a different movement because you're not coming from crawling to sit. And this is very much a phase, a transition phase in development before before crawling, of how you shift your weight, how you start. A lot of children crawl from this side sitting position. So the question that Sue just asked was, if a child misses a phase of crawling, is there something that they might miss? Moshe postulated that if children didn't crawl or walked too soon, that it did interfere with the basic organizations and patterns of movement that was necessary to be acquired before you moved into that relationship with gravity. He also talked about firstborn children being encouraged to walk too quickly, not developing their lumbar spine, the coordination power of their lower back, belly, hip joints, so being more likely to get problems in their spine later. Yeah. And there have been, as I said, this explosion of studies into development and learning, and lots of fields will use crawling and crawling games to improve the organizations that are needed for mapping, maths, planning, and other things. Because there's a lot of motor planning that goes on when you've got to figure out, how can I lift that arm? Plonk, face plant. Yeah, very interesting. In my practice per se, sometimes I ask the question. And sometimes it correlates and other times it doesn't. And I think it probably also depends on the activities the person does during their life, how much variation of physicalness do they engage in. And I expect if they don't find it in other ways, then it could be more likely. They're correlating shoulder injuries and people who didn't spend much time crawling. Oh, yes. Yes. And a little bit of a sidetrack, but because I'm working so much in Japan, and I'm noticing the difficulty the majority of people I see have in the organization. I mean, everybody does in the chest and spine for lots of reasons, which you'll go into more detail later. But in the Japanese culture, it is prevalent. And they sleep on their back, and they don't like dirt. So they don't let their children be on the floor. Chinese are the same. It's one way. If it's the only way, they don't mix it up. No. It's like their ironing board. Back. Okay. You ready to come back on your hands and knees? Okay. Please come back onto your hands and knees. But it's great that you're starting to create further variations. Next thing will be is you'll know what you've created. Could you comfortably spread your knees and put your knees outward and your toes touching? And slowly take your pelvis. So your knees are separated and you leaning on your hands. Don't go back too quick. Your big toes are touching, not your heels. Big toes, not your heels. So you can widen your knees a little further apart than you had them, and move your pelvis backwards in the direction of sitting on your heels, but slowly. And come forwards. Feel what happens in relationship with your feet to the floor, in the orientation of your heels as you move your pelvis backwards. You feel any tendency for your heels to turn outward as you go back? Yeah? Okay, come forwards again. Opposite, turning in. Try spreading your knees a little bit more. That made a difference, huh? And Sylvia, I didn't quite catch what your question was. Feel? Yeah? You can't feel either. Okay, it may be that they're already turned out. It might be that they've arrived there. Oh. Okay. Okay. So come back up. Stand for crawling again. You with your knees under your hips, whatever. Actually, no. Spread your knees a little bit further apart. Could you turn your right lower leg, your right foot, towards your right knee? So slide your lower leg inwards, but put your left leg a little bit to the side so it doesn't stop your left foot from sliding inwards. And then, so you're sliding your right foot towards in the direction of your left knee. Yes. Did I? Sorry. It only takes a lapse of attention. I'm looking at someone and their foot is going to my right, so I say whatever I said. Okay. And now keep your foot there and sit your pelvis back towards sitting on your heel or behind your leg. And come back. And notice what happens now. What do you feel with your foot in relationship to the floor? And with your heel, your buttock. What do you feel of your heel with your buttock? So for some it may be not possible, so go gently. So you go and you come back. You go and you come back. And as you're doing that, I notice most heads are looking at the floor. Most noses are getting closer to the floor, which means your elbows are bending. Would it make it any difference if you lifted your head and looked with your eyes forwards? Or if you lowered your head? So try once, lifting your head and looking forwards as you go back towards sitting on your right heel or below your right heel. And then come forwards again and sit back again. Can you put your hands somewhere where you don't need to shift them? Is that possible? Can you organize your right lower leg so that you actually sit on your heel? Sit on your heel. So you come back to sit on your heel. So it's not important necessarily to sit beyond your heel, that you're sitting on your heel. As you sit on your heel, the weight of your pelvis starts to turn your heel a little bit outward. outward relative to the inside edge of your foot. Okay, pause and then try it with your left leg. Experiment with the distance that you have between your knees. Can you keep your arms long? And what do you do with your head? If you lift your head, what happens, and look forwards with your eyes, what happens through the length of your spine? As you sit back on your heel, and then try it once with lowering your head, looking towards between your legs as you sit. So it's not that one way is right, but Moshe developed his method very much around survival, judo, biological necessities of our posture. And he says, I don't suggest you look down when you sit down if you're in the jungle. I know we're not in the jungle, but partly because of that, we don't have the same impetus, the same drive to organize ourselves for our survival. But if you think about that, if you think about what is something's coming and you sit back, it really changes the state of your nervous system, the state of your organization. Pardon? Yes, you never know what you're going to be sitting on, but then you're going to really organize yourself differently, aren't you? Another way of sitting. But yes, take a rest on your back. What draws your attention in yourself as you lie on the floor now? Please come back onto your hands and knees. And this time, come back to touching your toes one to the other. Spreading your knees. Toes, big toes towards each other. Hands somewhere comfortably, so they're not too far towards the end of, above your head, relative. Yep, that's better. And then sit back towards first your left heel and come forwards, and then your right heel. And just notice, is it any clearer now? How your foot is changing its shape relative to the floor? Whether there's any movement of your turning of your heels. So if you direct your pelvis, spread your knees a little bit more, really touch your big toes. Still going in, so it's an organizational thing, which is not uncommon. And then sit back towards the middle of both. No, they're not. Oh, you deliberately? Okay, sorry. Was that deliberate? Lockie? Was that deliberate? Okay. And so you could pay attention what you're doing in here. Okay. Could you put the top of your right foot into the sole of your left foot, which means you'll adjust your feet slightly. Put your right foot into the sole of your left foot. And now sit back towards your heels. Go gently. See, how do your feet respond to receiving your weight as you move backwards? So if it feels really easy to you, you could turn your right foot more to the left, the toes of your right foot more to the left. Can you breathe? And what do you do through the length of your spine? So do that a few times and then change your feet. Switch over. Change your feet. How can you change your feet? The next time you're as close to sitting on your feet and heels as you can you stay there and move your knees together and apart? Together and apart. And still breathe lightly. So your pelvis, your weight's back on your feet. And if it's too difficult, if it's uncomfortable in your feet, you can change the constraint, know that you've changed it. So you could put just your toes together, the big toes together, and sit back and move your knees together and apart. Okay. Then come back up onto your knees and try out the two ways of sitting again. So, we've got 4 ways. 2 ways and some variations on the themes. So on your hands and knees, slide one knee forwards and sit down to that side. So if you slide your right knee forwards, you'll sit your pelvis to the right. So your knee goes forwards and to the left. And then come back up. Slide your left knee forwards and to the right and sit down. Just notice if it's any clearer. And then try the other way, keeping your legs together, knees together, but not fixed on the ground. And moving both knees right and left. And see which one allows you to go faster. Where are you looking? Can you feel that when your knees go together, that your pelvis does a more up and down motion, and when your knees separate, one going forwards, one going slightly backwards, there's more an arc-like movement, semicircle. That's one of the key distinctions, other than also if your pelvis is making a larger movement, your head is probably going to be turned more at the other end of your spine. Okay, rest on your back. And notice what the floor tells you. It might seem like a strange way of saying something. But if you can interrupt your usual way of thinking, your usual perspective, it can perturb your system in a way that other interesting things might emerge. So listen to your contact with the floor and notice from that contact there's something a little different. The way your pelvis is lying, the way you sense your spine, your breathing, how connected your legs or your arms feel to yourself. And then take your time, slowly roll yourself to one side, bring yourself up to sitting and up to standing. What's present in your standing now? You can think of that idea of stacking up over your skeleton, your feet on the ground, your hips above your ankles, your pelvis above your hips. And it's not that there's a right way to stack, it just gives you a reference for scanning yourself to perhaps notice those relationships that you might not usually notice. Your shoulders relative to your pelvis or hips, your head on top of your spine, how your arms are hanging. And then when you're ready, walk around a little, sense yourself in walking. Give yourself a few moments to notice if there are any sensations of movement or qualities of movement that come into your awareness that are a little different than usual, that might have something to do with this lesson. And then let's just take a short 5-minute interval. Okay, we'll come back and do something else.